Well, hello there, studio teacher friends. Welcome to episode 132 of the Beyond Measure podcast. This is me, Christina Whitlock, here as your host, producer, and most importantly, your anytime piano teacher friend. If you ever need a reminder that there are indeed people out there who understand the ins and outs of what you do for a living, I've got your back. That's exactly what this show is for. And this summer, I am taking you along with me through some of my very favorite music teacher reading material. Today is stop number 4 on the summer bookshelf tour, and we are looking at a heavily researched and very comprehensive collection of ideas from one of my very favorite voices in the music teaching profession. Today, we are talking about The Mindful Musician by Vanessa Cornett. All right, so I'm a really huge fan of Vanessa Cornett. I totally embarrassed myself singing her many praises at this year's past MTNA conference, but I just can't help it. I have such admiration for the work that she puts out into the world. And as her book, The Mindful Musician, makes clear, her mission is very personal, not just because of the impact that it's had on her life and her family, but because she sees the radical differences between what has been and what should or what could be. There is a sincerity in all of Vanessa Cornett's work, and I think that's what I really connect with her on. Every word she says or writes drips with a genuine desire to help musicians live a higher quality of life. And I am just really grateful for voices like hers in the world. So let's talk about The Mindful Musician. It's not short, guys. It's also not that long. I mean, it's only 241 pages, but those pages are packed. My first impression of the book when I first laid eyes on it was that it was probably going to be very dense reading. Vanessa Cornett does not skimp on her research, and that is very evident in her writing. But at the same time, she has this trademark approachability that I believe comes from this genuine desire to help the profession. So while I do believe it is a book best digested slowly, it's not because it's a difficult read. It's actually quite an easy and satisfying read. For me, it's just something I really want to consider thoughtfully as I go. And there is a lot there. I'm really struggling today just to pull 3 takeaways to share with you, but I'm going to give it my best because that's what I said I was going to do, right? So, the book also comes with access to an online database of breathing exercises, self evaluations, and all kinds of other stuff. And those things are right up my alley, and they're very high in value. So I mention this in case you get a little sticker shock when you first see the cost of this book, because it is a little more of an investment. I will say, though, if this is a topic that you know you would benefit from learning more about, it is truly worth every penny. So let's get to our first takeaway from The Mindful Musician. Again, I am not here offering up a summary of the book in any way. I just want to provide you a glimpse into 3 little nuggets of information today. Let's first take a look at a portion of chapter 1 that is dedicated to peak performance experiences, shall we? Vanessa's thoughts are similar to those that I share often with my students. We prepare and we hope for one of those peak performances, right? By that, I mean a performance where everything feels controlled, at ease, and just like we've practiced, right? However, in the grand scheme of things, those peak performances are pretty rare, right? They do happen, and we should strive for them. But generally, that whole truth about everybody makes mistakes, well, it comes for us more often than not, right? Some mistakes in performance are avoidable, and others are more inevitable from time to time. But research shows that those peak performances come when we are in what they call the flow state, or what some of us just refer to as the zone. Like, oh, that rehearsal just felt so great because I was totally in the zone. Well, Vanessa Cornett proposes the main issue is the fact that we can't access the zone on demand, right? She says, and I quote, "If we don't know exactly where the zone is, how can we get there?" End quote. And of course, she's right. It's one thing to know what it feels like to achieve that flow state, but it's totally a different thing to know how to find it. All artists and creative types understand this struggle, right? It's just like, get me to the zone. So, as the title of this book would suggest, the best option at our disposal when it comes to trying to intentionally find that flow state is, of course, learning to practice mindfulness, which, in a totally oversimplified definition, just means that you become more aware of your whole self in this present moment in time. There is a sense of calm observation required with mindfulness. It means stripping away judgments of why you feel the way you do and how that could be perceived as right or wrong. It's just learning to notice what is right now. Vanessa includes a quote from Plutarch, who is a Greek philosopher, and it says, "What we achieve inwardly will change outer reality." And I mean, this is not news to any of us. We all know the success of a performance often hinges on our inner dialogue in the moment, right? Like, I am always reminding my students they need to build kind of a mental script to run through as they perform. Because otherwise, as soon as that thought of, oh, here comes that passage, I hope I don't fumble it, as soon as that thought comes into their head, what happens? They fumble it, right? You can't think, oh, I hope I don't have a memory slip in this next phrase, because, well, there it is, right? Performing is a mental art. Everything is won or lost inside our heads. And I just really appreciate the supporting evidence to this truth in chapter 1 of The Mindful Musician. Let's move on to my second point for today. I'm going to warn you, friends, this one might sting a little bit, okay? Let's talk about getting organized. Wait, why does Vanessa Cornett include the idea of organization in a book about the mindful musician? Well, this comes up in her discussion about habits of successful performers, and she makes a pretty compelling argument. In her own words, Vanessa Cornett reminds us that, remember that organization is a learned skill. If you have the discipline to learn the necessary scales, lyrics, rhythmic patterns, or fingerings necessary to hone your craft, you can learn to cultivate organizational skills in a way that resonates with your unique creative brain. Okay, first of all, bless her for giving hope to those of us who suffer from that trademark creativity minded disorganization, right? And I do agree with her. I mean, we are very disciplined individuals and we pull off incredible things. Surely we can learn to hone some better systems to help us optimize our lives as musicians and performers. Despite the fact that so many of us link disorganization and the creative brain as an all in one package. I have often laughed at the way the world tends to perceive musicians as like free spirited and chill, when in actuality, most professional musicians I know are a lot more type A and, well, anxious. Anyway, this portion of organization is not necessarily speaking to the state of our desktops or those endless piles of music books that seem to sprout up on any semi flat surface. But Vanessa suggests that we learn to become organized in a manner that allows us to track short and long term goals, data from practice sessions, personal habits, and a lot more. Consistently consistently keeping a journal, whether that's digital or otherwise, of what you do every practice session, for instance, and how you felt, and other observations, that is going to lead to mindfulness because you are inevitably paying attention to things that have otherwise gone unnoticed in previous practice sessions. Just as an aside, I talked about encouraging students to keep a performance journal back in episode 66 of this podcast while I was discussing preparing students for performance. So, I've long been a fan of journaling for lots of reasons, and I have a super simple performance journal printable that I ask my students to complete after every performance. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this episode so you can grab it for your own students, okay? I think it's incredibly valuable to help our students build a habit of reflection around their own performances. Okay, so wrapping up point number two, I will just say that this book is full of terrific advice for how to track your own personal habits and more, with that intention of helping you be more connected to your own life. I find it really helpful. All right, so let's talk about my third highlight from the mindful musician, and that has to do with the always necessary topic of performance anxiety. Oh, yeah. Obviously, learning to deal with performance anxiety is likely one of the primary goals of becoming a more mindful musician, right? I've talked about this topic a lot here on the podcast, and I will drop links to some previous episodes in the show notes. The main thing I've reiterated time and time again is the fact that our goal as teachers is not to eliminate the anxious feelings. That's generally far beyond our control. But we can help our students learn to acknowledge the feelings, to greet them, and to accept them, and to perform alongside them anyway. I was going to dive deeper here, but I see the clock ticking, and I'm going to leave it at this. Vanessa talks a lot about what performance anxiety truly is. There's a lot of great information there that you're going to need to read for yourself. But she also talks about what performance anxiety is not. And friends, performance anxiety is not that feeling that students have before a performance that they are not prepared for. That feeling of anxiousness that comes from a lack of preparation, well, our wise author here reminds us that, quote, no performance coaching, no mental skills training, no nifty books or websites, and no anxiety management techniques can compensate for a genuine lack of preparation. We must be brutally honest with ourselves and understand that any fear stemming from a lack of preparation is simply valuable feedback for how to better prepare next time. End quote. Okay, right? I tell my students this all the time, and I was delighted to receive affirmation of these thoughts the first time I read The Mindful Musician. She goes on to discuss playing repertoire that is appropriate for you, which is another favorite soapbox of mine. Anyway, sufficient to say, we can't deal with the real root of performance anxiety if we're not adequately prepared for our performance? I will address a suggestion on that front after today's toast. But, friends, there we have it. Stop number 4 on our summer bookshelf tour, The Mindful Musician by Vanessa Cornett. It's a book full of wise words, lots of research, but also entertaining quips about Hello Kitty lunchboxes and snow zombies. It's a serious book that doesn't take itself seriously. And I love that. I mean, I do. It's kind of my thing too, right? Let's share a toast before we move on with our days, shall we? Grab that nearest beverage, and here we go. Studio music teacher friends from all around the world, I want to empower you today to know that change is possible within you. There are so many aspects of ourselves that we sometimes get hardened to, and we just assume that they're part of us forever, right? When in actuality, we are malleable beings. This doesn't happen without intentional, focused work, of course, but there are so many possibilities out there just waiting for you to pay attention to them. So, I want you to think about that really hard this week, okay? This is me raising my glass to you, my ever contemplative music teacher friends. Hear, hear. Okay, so thanks for tuning in to episode 132 of the Beyond Measure podcast. In today's show notes, you're going to find some extra good stuff. Let me tell you about it. First of all, I am linking to a pair of interviews that my friend Leela Viss did with today's featured author, Vanessa Cornett, over on the Key Ideas podcast. These interviews are not to be missed. There is so much good stuff out there. And if you have any questions as to why I love this author, they will not be questions anymore after you listen to those interviews. So make sure you check those out on Key Ideas. Since we mentioned organization today, I thought I would let you know that my pal Amy Chaplin over at the Piano Pantry podcast just opened up registration for her latest series of digital organization coachings. She's trying out a 3-day intensive round, and I can just tell you from experience that this content is great. I've done her coaching series 2 times, and I wouldn't even hesitate to do it again. That link is, again, in the show notes. And since we mentioned preparing students for performance, my friend Jana Williamson of YouTube fame has designed the course on preparing confident performers. It is a series of self-led video lessons, and I assure you that content is golden. I will link that in the show notes as well. There's also some links to some related episodes, and you can find out more about ways to support the show and all kinds of things. So, if you are struggling to find the show notes for this episode, you can always head to christinawhitlock.com/episode 132, and you will find all of that information there. Thank you so much, my friends. Next week, we are covering a very popular book in creative, with a capital C, land. Any guesses what it will be? Drop me an email at beyondmeasurepodcast@gmail.com and let me know your guess. Thanks so much, friends. Let's hang out on social media. I'm over at Beyond Measure Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And without further delay, I'll just wish you onward and upward.